Welcome, everyone. Welcome to We Earth Radio. I'm your host, Michael Stone, and I am so excited to have my friend LynneTwist here today. She is a global visionary and activist committed to creating a future that is environmentally sustainable, spiritually fulfilling, and socially just. She's the co-founder of the Pachamama Alliance, the founder of the Soul of Money Institute, and the author of the best-selling book, The Soul of Money. Over the past 40 years, she's worked with people in 50 countries and over 100,000 people, as well as many organizations and companies, inspiring them to expand how they see themselves and empowering them to express their commitment and their creativity to secure the future of all life. And today, we're going to get to talk about her new book, Living a Committed Life, Finding Freedom and Fulfillment in a Purpose Larger Than Yourself. Lynn, so great to be with you.
So great to be with you, Michael Stone. How we're old, long time friends and
long time,
partners. Yeah.
So let's see, let's talk with what you're always inspired, but what is the inspiration of living a committed life of service, and how did that inspiration, the initial inspiration, how did that kind of set you off on your path?
Well, I think I always go back to the taproot of the my relationship with Buckminster Fuller, the great engineer, architect, grandfather of the future of the 20th century, who I knew and was able to be with quite a bit in ways that was a great privilege for me. And Werner Erhard, the founder of EST and the Landmark work, had those two extraordinary human beings had a huge impact on my life. And they came together in 1976, 1977. And out of their relationship, there were many sources of the Hunger Project organization. But for me, the Hunger Project was born out of their relationship with each other. And I had a hand in that. And when Bucky declared and claimed that his life was about an experiment, could a little individual make a difference with their life that would positively impact all of humanity? Could he live a life where he creates a world that works for everyone with no one and nothing left out? I was so inspired by that. That talked about inspiration. I thought, oh my God, what an incredible statement. What an incredible vision. What an incredible commitment. And then Werner Erhard, who really was living and expressing the commitment to create a world that works for everyone with no one and nothing left out. That phrase really comes from him. I just thought, I'm on that team, whatever that means. And then the Hunger Project was really born out of all of that. And the Hunger Project became my life's work at that time. And it was deeply, deeply inspiring to me to even contemplate, consider, and then be someone who was inventing and generating a conversation to make the end of hunger and starvation an idea whose time has come. So that's kind of the taproot of my committed life. And that's the best answer I can give you to the question. But I'd also say my mother and father, my upbringing. My mother was a very active person in the community. My father was a very inspiring man, a musician. That set the stage for me to see that I could step into that kind of a life. So,
yeah, we have a lot of the same influence. I remember in San Rafael, probably the last talk that Bucky did, at least in California, and I was talking to him and he pinched me on the cheek and he said, "Keep up the good work." And I just felt like I found my grandfather,
yeah, right.
Whatever he did, I want to do,
Yeah.
Such an amazing thing. And then here we are, close to 50 years later, 40 some years. And, if you look at the media, the mainstream media or the social media, and it's really easy to fall into despair and doubt and denial and depression and the sense of hopelessness. So I see a lot of people just getting overwhelmed with them. So how do we shift our focus from this overwhelm to really living a more meaningful life?
Well, I get in overwhelm all the time, so I want to make sure I own that. At the same time, when we're overwhelmed, often the context of our life is too small for the content. It's like a lifeboat that has too many people in it, so it sinks, you know. It's too what we're holding, how we're holding ourselves is too small for what's coming through. So we become overwhelmed. We become it overflows and seeps through cracks. If we create a larger context, I'm saying it kind of physically, but I mean almost spiritually, ontologically, everything starts to flow. So for example, the times we're living in, I say the epic times we're living in, are not happening to us like we're a victim of the terrible divisiveness in the United States, or the victim of a pandemic that's taken so many lives and made us all worry about being sick or getting sick. Or we're not the victim of the climate crisis, even though horrible thing that the earthquake in Turkey, as much as we think, or our conversation is, we're the victim of something. When we actually create a larger context or a reframe, or you could say a new narrative, it all can not, it's not that the disasters and the illnesses and the death and the destruction that's happening right now in Turkey and Syria goes away, or the pandemic goes away, or the climate crisis goes away, or the political divisiveness goes away. It's still there, but there's a way to hold it so that you can be with it instead of be at the effect of it, and even have some sovereignty about how you relate to it. So I'm going to give you an example that comes from the indigenous people that we work with in the Andes and the Amazon. The pandemic, I'm going to use that as my example, which we all got grossly, you know, humbled by, and became at the effect of, and, you know, got sick and, or had to stay inside, or people died, people that we loved. It seemed like a scourge. But another way of looking at it, the indigenous people in particular have said, in some primordial place of who we are as a species, we've been waiting and yearning and longing and almost praying for something sacred and powerful enough to disrupt the way we were living, that we tried to disrupt ourselves, but we couldn't, knowing that we're off course, knowing that we're heading towards our own demise, our own destruction, and being so powerful in the institutions and structures we built that are kind of forcing us in this direction that's not going to turn out, so that we yearned and almost prayed for something powerful and sacred enough to disrupt that trajectory and make us rethink and reboot and re-examine and kind of go home, stay inside, but also go home here and relook at the way we're living. Now, I know that, you know, many people would say, well, we're back business as usual. I say, no, we're not at all. We're, you know, there are some things we've gone back to that we're ashamed to be once again participating in, but we know better now. We really do know better. We are abhorred by the oil companies having their best quarter ever this last quarter. Profitable. We know that's not right, and that they're not paying taxes. No one wants that, including the oil companies themselves. They're embarrassed. The experience of the climate crisis is so palpable. You know, if you've got your house is on fire and you're flooded, or you're in a place where you're, you know, physically impacted by it, which is everybody now in some way or another. Illnesses, autism rampant, you know, cancer all over the place, people committing suicide, young people, because they don't think we have a future. You can't deny it anymore. No, and anybody who does is considered crazy. So I'll say that the pandemic, I'll use that as an example, one way of looking at it, it's morning sickness
Mm.
for a species that's pregnant with a new emerging evolutionary leap. Now, I can't prove that, but I think that's a way to look at it. It's not happening to us, it's happening for us. It's not a punishment, it's an ally. And it's a harsh, fierce ally with lots of consequences. But Paul Hawkins says, the climate crisis is feedback. We're not the victims of it, we created it. And it's giving us the feedback that's so strong that we need that. And it's happening for us to make the course corrections that are huge that we couldn't make without harsh, intense feedback. So, what I'm trying to say is, if you have, and I'm sure that you're doing your trauma work, you're doing this too. The trauma that individuals experience and the breakdowns always have the seeds of a breakthrough that's bigger than the breakdown. And if we're willing to look for that and open our arms to that, then not only can we be with the depressing, scary, confronting, kind of heartbreaking reality of the world, we can see it as the feedback we need to become the kind of human family that we know it's ours to become a species that is a contributing, finding our rightful role. And the indigenous people have saying we're being humbled because we need to be by these climactic events, by the pandemic. And when you're pregnant as a woman and you don't know you're pregnant, you think you're sick. You really do think you're sick. It feels terrible. You're throwing up in the morning. You're getting exhausted by 3 p.m. There's things you can't eat. You feel funny. You have nausea sometimes in the middle of the night. You can't sleep. And then you go to the doctor, you find out you're pregnant, and it's like, oh, I'm going to have a baby. And then you have a vision. And as my friend Rebdi, I was just with her, she says, pain pushes until vision pulls.
Mm.
So we're in the pain part, and we need to create the vision, which will pull us through the pain. So that's a long response to your question, because I think people need a context, a narrative, a space that they can see that all this turmoil that's happening is, as Bucky predicted it would. You probably remember, he said all the institutions of humankind in 50 years, he said this is in 1976, will eventually become so dysfunctional that they will start falling apart and we won't be able to fix them anymore. We won't be able to prop them up. We will have to let them go, hospice their natural death, and bring forth new structures and systems that are consistent with a you and me world rather than a you or me world. A partnership model rather than a dominator model. A reunion of the heart and mind of humanity rather than an overwhelming patriarchy. A decolonization of not just the political landscape of the world, but the decolonization of our hearts and minds and souls. So that's a story, that's a narrative. I can't prove it, but I want to live in that narrative. And that lifts one out of depression and despair and anger and into, let's generate the possibility of this time and know that we can get through this, and it will strengthen us. It will make us who we need to be to give birth to a new kind of human being.
That's brilliant. I love that. In working with trauma a lot, I've found that the two outcomes of trauma response, the first one is a sense of separation, and the second one is an experience of scarcity, not enough of anything, which
Yes.
you talk about a lot. And just to weave that in with the that separation, I'm trying to think of her name, the climate scientist that I've been working with, but she's saying that climate change is a relationship issue. It's not a political issue, it has political consequences. It's not a technology issue. It's really a relationship issue. So the first thing is that we have this lack of, you call in your book, a you and me life, or as Bucky says, the you are me life. So talk about that and how that larger context has to include beyond ourself. It's not a self context.
Yeah. Well, the larger context is to realize that we're in the continuum of evolution and that we are beings, we are souls, we are beings, we are manifestation, we are incarnated on this planet as human beings. And we're part of the community of life. And that this is an epic time when this particular species called human beings have become so powerful that we have entered into from the Holocene period to the Anthropocene, and to be responsible for being, it began in 1977, according to Christiana Figueres, who facilitated the Paris Accords. We're now in the Anthropocene, so we're responsible for the future, and that is both a little bit daunting, but it's also, it ennobles our lives. It gives us agency to create the future, realizing that it is in our hands. The earth will be fine, but whether or not we have a future, a viable, livable future, is in our hands. And that agency, that power, and really that accountability, that responsibility, is a privilege, really, and can be, if we hold it this way, ennobling. Gives us the opportunity, as we say in the symposium, which I know you deliver from time to time, it gives us the opportunity to live the most meaningful lives any generation of humankind has ever lived, knowing that the choices we make impact the future of life for 1,000 years. That's not a burden. That's ennobling us. That's really saying your life matters. So that's an opportunity to step up, step in, step out, and step out of a little life starring us about our own wants and needs and desires. It starts to show up as petty in the face of the epic challenges we're facing as a human family. And Bucky always thought in long swaths of time. And we sometimes are limited to our own little lifetime, and what can we take credit for, and what can we put on our tombstone, and what can we check off on our to-do list. But really, we're in a big, long continuum. And what is the contribution we're making to that continuum of life, that evolutionary story? And that gives you some humility, and also the opportunity and the privilege of being a contribution and getting in the flow, the natural flow. So, like I'll just say that that's when you become one with it, which is what you're kind of pointing to. And the indigenous people of the Amazon, for example, the people that you and I have been so fortunate to know and be with, they're not perfect. They have all kinds of problems too, but they're not there defending the forest, the Amazon rainforest. They are of the forest. They are the forest, maintaining and expressing itself. They are one with it. As you and I are human incarnations of the earth, finding her full self-expression in what it means to be human. So that oneness, that interconnectivity, that we are each otherness, that not you or me, but you and me that you just spoke about, that's really, I think, the radical surprising truth. And the lie of scarcity, the lie of separation, is the fundamental come from or ground of being of our institutions, our governance, our religions, our educational system, and certainly the economy, in a way that keeps us in this illusion that we're separate from each other, from other species, from the earth, rather than It's a continuum of the flow of life. You know, when you and I breathe in the molecules and the energy of people who lived 500 years ago, and also of the raccoons and the squirrels and the leaves and the twigs and you and me. And, you know, we are completely interconnected. We are each other. And it's hard to stay with that because the institutions and the scientific kind of direction that we've gone has separated us so deeply in the narrative of how we see ourselves. But that's what you and I have been working on our whole lives, is reclaiming that oneness, reclaiming it and having it transform our perception, our worldview. And I really appreciate your work in trauma now that you've told me is your kind of the focus of your work now, because as you just said, trauma is one of the ways we separate ourselves and go into fear of not enough. I'm not enough, you're not enough, it's not enough. So I love that connection you're making with the work that we've done together for so long.
Yeah. You know, by the way, Karen O'Brien was who I was talking about, that I was quoting in terms of it's a relationship issue, that climate change
yes,
is primarily a relationship issue. But also many scientists have moved beyond the Anthropocene and are now talking about the Pyrocene being the time we're moving in.
What is
And
that? What is Pyrocene? Tell me.
pyro means fire.
Oh,
The Pyrocene, time of fire. And so when you look at that, one of the reasons I like that is it puts a fire under it. It's like,
yes.
This is critical, this is important, wake up. And one of the things that a lot of people had trouble understanding during the Hunger Project was, what does it mean to take a stand? Because I think that whole thing with the Hunger Project was, many people never really got that was that idea of creating an idea whose time has come, as Bucky said. Can you talk about taking a stand?
Yeah, well, taking a stand is a topic in my book, and something that I really think is a distinction. And I distinguish taking a stand from taking a position. And when you take a position, the dynamics of positionality is, if you say right, it creates left. If you say up, it creates down. In other words, positionality creates its oppositionality. Each position creates its opposition. So if I say pro-choice, it creates pro-life, really. And if I get more adamant about pro-choice, pro-life gets more adamant. You know, it's positionality that it creates the opposite. Or another way of talking about positionality is point of view. And a point of view is actually, if you think about it, almost like physically a point from which we view the world. So if you're in a football stadium and you're on the 50-yard line, you have this point of view of the whole field. If you're in the end zone, you have a completely different point of view of the game. If you don't realize that your point of view is totally 100% accurate for you, and start arguing with a person whose point of view is at the end zone, and they say, well, no, that's not how it looked to me. He threw it across the field, and that's 100% accurate for their point of view. They're seeing it from a different point of view. Or if you're in a room or a theater, you know, you see the same thing from two different points of view. So you see it from a different point of view. And that's true of positionality. So when you take a stand, you actually relinquish your point of view or your position. And what you receive from relinquishing that or letting it go is you receive vision. And vision is being able to see all points of view. They're a contribution rather than something you're arguing with. They inform you to be more skillful with your stand. You're not against anything, you're all about for. So for example, Martin Luther King was a beautiful example of a stand taker. It's not that he didn't drop down from, let's say, 30,000 feet is where he was standing. a healthy and productive life for all human beings, no matter what their color. But he would drop down from that stand and take a position against this kind of legislation, or Black kids being kept out of, healthy schools, but from a stand for all children and all human beings have a healthy and productive life. Then the positionality is not so rancorous, is not so angry. It's not so you're wrong and I'm right. It has the power to work itself out if it's negotiated or held by a stand taker. I was just with Christiana Figueres in Costa Rica, whose father eliminated the army, whose country has the highest literacy rate in the world, whose country is on 100% renewable energy. And she is in her own right one of the most powerful stand takers of our time, in my opinion. And she negotiated the Paris Accord. Paris Accord, that's impossible that happened. 196 countries aligning on a document that had them commit to protocols for 2050 that in some cases looked impossible to them. And she negotiated that Paris Accord treaty. And I was just with her, and, of course, it's too late, too far away. It needs to be 2030. Of course, there's way more that people could and maybe should have committed to. But just for the moment, that 196 countries agreed to those kind of protocols is a historic milestone. We've never seen that before in the history of the world. And she did that. And she did that because she took a stand. It wasn't a position, it was a stand. And everybody had their position, but her stand was so powerful. It created a clearing, a visionary clearing, where the positions could loosen. The points of view could start to realize, well, maybe everybody doesn't see it this way. And come to an alignment that is completely and totally historic. Historians forever, if we're still here, will write about that moment. And even though that platform is not the platform that will really give us the livable planet we want, it's a platform from which now we can begin to envision a completely restored planet, a completely regenerated Earth systems, living systems. So I'm really all about stand taking. Yes. And knowing that everybody has a stand within them. And it's not a goal. It's not something you can ever take credit for. It's making a contribution to the continuum, the long continuum of the evolution of humanity. Mm-hmm. And you have a role to play in that. And what is that role?
Yeah. One of the things you talk about in living a committed life is the invisible forces of faith. Talk about that as our relationship to the unknown and being able to trust that, which we don't know when we've taken a stand and we have a vision. Where does faith come in?
Well, faith is a word I probably, did I use it in the book? I'm not sure. I'm not as deeply engaged in the word faith as I am in trust, I'll say.
Okay. You did use it. You called it the invisible forces of faith in your book.
Yeah. Okay. Well, and when I unpack that now, I'll say that it's related very much to trust. Mm-hmm. It's almost like you give your word and then you live by it. Mm. And that's maybe an invisible force of faith in your word, mm-hmm. and also trust that there's an integrity in the universe that Bucky used to call it the intellectual integrity of the universe. Remember that phrase? I love that he used to talk about the intellectual integrity of the universe. And I would say Bucky taught me to have faith in that. I'll call it now also trust in that. Thomas Berry, the great theologian said to pay attention to the fact that the universe, the forces, the invisible energy that put the stars in motion, that created the universe, is still at work. And we can have faith in that evolutionary guidance and trust. We can have trust in that. And if you have that kind of faith, you allow something to come through you rather than what's my opinion or what do I think or what is my way. You become a clearing for something to come through you rather than be your, here's the way I want it to go.
I love that. I often think of the difference between life happening to you and life living through you. That,
Exactly.
Yeah. So
Yeah. It's like Bucky going farther than you or me paradigm to you and me paradigm to you are me paradigm. Yeah. Right.
Dan Siegel has a really great new book. We just did an interview recently on intra-connected rather than interconnected, intra. So instead of with, it's within that, the same concept. I love that.
Right. I love that too. That's beautiful.
One of the things that has been a big commitment of yours also in all these projects is the power of the feminine and supporting that. Why is that so important, do you think, at this time?
Well, I actually think this is the Sophia century. And I'll call it the Sophia century because there's many prophecies that have alluded to that or prophesied that. And if you think of us in the first 100 years of the first century of the third millennium, and that we're 23 years into that long view that Bucky always talked about is very helpful because we're giving birth to something this century, something new. And that's what the feminine does, not without the masculine. The masculine needs to be involved, obviously. But what gives birth is this feminine energy that lives in all of us, the yin energy, the capacity to generate life. And we need to generate life. We're in a regeneration period. It's not sustainability anymore. That's inadequate, although it was a very important period. But now we're in regenerating, and the feminine is what generates life. And so the divine feminine energy coming through women and coming through men and coming probably more visibly and powerfully through women is what's being called for in all the great problems that we face, because they're the result of the over domination of the patriarchy, one could say. Rihanna Eisler would definitely say that the dominator model it's lived its life out. It's done some beautiful things, some extraordinary things. It's been enormously powerful, but it's no longer appropriate and it's out of control. Where the partnership model, which is more feminine, which is give and take, which is collaborative, which isn't so heavy duty on competition, which is never winner take all. It's always win, 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 is what's being called for on the planet now. And that has a feminine face, even if it's coming through a very, very extraordinary man like yourself. So that is, I think, why I call this the Sophia century. And I say that to give permission and validation and affirmation to the feminine energy that we can all feel actually emerging and coming through us. So yes.
Beautiful. I love that. And another phrase that you coined in your book, I don't know if you coined it, but it grabbed me, was seeing youth as elders in universe time. Talk about that. I love that.
That comes from Bucky. That's direct.
Does it come from Bucky? I know universe time does, but I didn't realize it was seeing the youth that way.
Well, I'll just tell you the story that we had Bucky for dinner, and it was such an honor, and I was so excited. And he came and he wanted to eat in the kitchen with the kids. And I thought how charming, and of course I got him, we were gonna eat in the dining room, we were gonna have this nice dinner with Buckminster Fuller. No, he wanted to meet in the kitchen with the kids. So the kids came down and sat at the table, and my kids were 6, 8, and 10, and their names are Billy, Summer, and Zach, and Summer is the middle one. She was 8. And we're sitting around this round table in our kitchen, very informally, and Bucky's like a grandpa sitting there. They didn't have a clue who he was, but I was just like in awe. And my daughter Summer said something as an 8-year-old that was profound, a child gem coming out of her mouth. And it was a showstopper. And Bucky turned to Bill, my husband, and myself, and he said, "Never forget, your children are your elders in universe time. They've come into a more complete, more evolved universe than you'll ever understand except through their eyes."
So true.
And boy, did that turn my life around, and it just sort of rearranged the cells in my body. And he wasn't just talking about my children, he was talking about future generations that are here now. They are the ancestors of an age to come. I am, you are, but so are the people who are being born today. If you think about especially females being born today, some of the biological scientists say that they will live, rather than now, we've doubled our longevity from when I was born in 1945, and I think you were born right around there.
Same year.
The longevity was longevity numbers when we were born were something around 50, 48, 50, certainly women a little bit more than men. And now it's 80, 85, not quite doubling. And scientists and many biologists feel that there's no question about the fact that someone born today is going to live to 100 and maybe 105. And you think about that, what will they see? What will they experience? What do they need to be equipped for? What will evolution give them that didn't give us? And my granddaughter, my oldest, is 23. She was born in 1999 in July. And I remember, because of the thing that Bucky said, your children are elders in universe time. She's my granddaughter. When I looked at her when she was born as this little baby, I realized she's going to inhabit 3 centuries. She's in the final months of the 20th century. She's a female. She may make it all the way through the 21st century into the 22nd century. I think she probably will. And what she will experience and what she will see and what she will need to face, the universe will equip her for that. I can see she's now in law school. She's 23. She's starting law school now. She's so wise. She's so attuned to the environmental issues we face. She's so clear about who she is. She's mixed race. So she self-identifies as a person of color, and she's Muslim. So she has to face the world of religious persecution in whatever form it's taking this century. She's up for it. And I love that quote from Bucky, and that's how I heard it. It was right out of his mouth at my kitchen table.
You've always been such a great storyteller. I remember when I was a seminar leader, back in the 70s, and you would come in, well, it was after the Hunger Project, so late 70s, early 80s, you'd come in and tell these great, and everybody would go, wow, and be inspired and support and give money and take a stand for the end of hunger. And, storytelling is so important because we live inside of a story. And
Yes.
So I'd love it if you could talk a little bit about I want to call it cleansing our story, or somehow upgrading our story. And I'm wondering about your thoughts about that.
Well, that's exactly what this era needs. You're right, Michael. And it needs to be a story, a narrative that we invent and create that is visionary. And, that wonderful phrase from the Bible, without vision, the people will perish. And I think that's really valid.
Mhm.
And I really believe, and you and I have been trained in this by the same masters, that we don't really live in our lives. We live in the conversation we have about our lives. We don't really live in our relationships, our communities, our jobs, our world. We live in the conversation we have about our relationships, our job, our communities, our world. And we may not have the power we would like to have over our relationships, let's say, or our community. But we have absolute omnipotence over the power and omnipotence over the conversation we have about our relationships, our community, our world. That's where the levers and dials of life are. So generating or inventing or being privy to narratives that empower, conversations that empower, not getting involved in gossip, not watching dystopian videos on television, which there are plenty of them. Empowering yourself with what conversation do you want to be in, because that actually defines your experience of life. So being in with that doesn't step over the conversations that need to be had about what's not working, but having those conversations in the context of we're empowered to deal with them. So it's not positive thinking. It's really managing the narrative, generating the narrative, inventing the narrative that's accurate and grounded, but is in that space of possibility. And
Our
living.
stories too, our stories become habits. They're habitual. So it's like breaking any habit is with awareness, with bringing awareness to, oh, I'm living in a story and it's become habitual. I think it was Warren that used to say, everyone knows how mother is, or everyone who knows how their partner is, but no, that's a habit of how we look. So it has to be brought with fresh eyes and a fresh view and awareness in order to create that new story, that vision that we're talking about.
Exactly. Yeah, that's the keys to the kingdom, I think. So I really appreciate what you're saying, and I think that's really true. And the letting go of stories that are disempowering us or shutting us down or oppressing us is the work that you've been doing all your life. And I'm so pleased to hear today that you have a new story about your own life that you shared with me, and maybe you'll be sharing with your guests sometimes. So it's a very powerful part of life, and one that I feel very privileged to be aware of, conscious of, because as you and I know, we've had the great privilege of taking so many of the great teachers that we've had and applying their teachings to our life. So yeah, thank you for that question and that constant insight.
You have been one of my great teachers, and I'm so grateful for our friendship and all the, you've led me into so many things, and I'm so happy that you had. And I just want to mention your new book, Living a Committed Life. And just thank you so much for everything, taking the time, and for your just unbreakable stand, one after another. And we're still going strong.
We are
at this age. It's good.
Thank you so much, Michael. Good to see you. Good to be with you, and congratulations on the new story in your life.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay.
Hope to see you soon.
Take care.
Thanks. Bye-bye.